The wagon wheels groaned against the rutted dirt road as Maeve Callahan arrived in Dustwater on a Tuesday that smelled of alkali dust and horse sweat. The town sprawled before her like a collection of weathered bones, false-fronted buildings leaning against each other for support, their paint peeling in long strips that curled like bark from a dying tree. She'd chosen this place precisely because it looked forgotten. A town where a woman could disappear into the landscape if she kept her head down and her business clean. But keeping one's head down proved difficult when you stood 5 feet and 10 inches in your stockings. The wagon driver, a grizzled man named Cornelius Pike, spat tobacco juice into the dust as he unloaded her trunk. "That's the old Hendricks place," he said, nodding toward a cabin set back from the main street, half hidden by a stand of cottonwoods. "Been empty near 2 years now. Roof needs work." Maeve counted out his payment in worn bills, adding an extra $1. "I'm aware of the roof's condition. Mr. Pike, thank you for your service." He pocketed the money, eyeing her with the kind of curiosity she'd grown accustomed to, the look that said a woman her height, traveling alone, settling in a place like Dustwater, was either running from something or touched in the head, maybe both. "You need help getting settled, ma'am." "No." She hefted her trunk with both hands, muscles straining but managing. "I'll manage quite well on my own." The cabin stood like a testament to abandonment. Windows filmed with dust, porch boards warped and gaps showing between them, chimney mortar crumbling. But the bones were good solid log construction, a stone foundation that hadn't shifted much despite neglect. Maeve set down her trunk and walked the perimeter, noting what needed immediate attention and what could wait. Inside, mice had made homes in the corners, and a layer of grit covered every surface. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs with broken rungs, and shelves that sagged under the weight of nothing but dust. A smaller room off the back would serve as sleeping quarters. Out the rear door, a lean-to sheltered what might generously be called a kitchen area, and beyond that, a small stable that had seen better decades. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By evening, word had spread through Dustwater like wildfire through August grass. The saloon talk centered on the lady tall as a lodgepole pine who'd taken the Hendricks cabin. Speculation ran wild she was a widow, a spinster, a woman of questionable morals fleeing scandal back east. The fact that she'd been seen hauling lumber from the mercantile to patch the roof only added fuel to the gossip fire. "Ain't natural," declared Josiah Briggs, the barber, as he trimmed Mayor Thornton's whiskers. "Woman doing man's work. Mark my words. She's trouble brewing." At the mercantile, Samuel Morrison defended his decision to sell her the lumber. "Her money's good as any man's. Better than some, considering she paid cash up front." His wife, Constance, sniffed disapprovingly. "That may be, but what kind of woman refuses introductions? I went to welcome her properly, brought my best elderberry preserves, and she barely opened the door wide enough to take the jar. Thanked me polite enough, but made it clear she weren't interested in socializing." The truth was simpler than any of their theories. Maeve had learned through hard experience that socializing led to questions. Questions led to expectations, and expectations led to disappointment. Better to be thought odd than to invite the kind of scrutiny that peeled back carefully constructed walls. She worked through the week, rising with the sun and retiring well after it set. The roof proved challenging. Her height helped her reach the rafters. But the work was hard, and her hands, though strong, weren't accustomed to handling rough lumber. Splinters embedded themselves in her palms like tiny accusations. She pulled them out by lamplight, jaw set against the sting. On Sunday, she ventured into town for supplies. The general store fell quiet when she entered, conversations stopping mid-sentence like birds startled into silence. She selected her items methodically: nails, tar paper, flour, coffee, salt pork, beans. At the counter, Morrison tallied her purchases while his wife watched from behind a display of fabric bolts. "Planning to stay long, Miss," Morrison ventured. "Callahan, and yes, She counted out exact change. I'm establishing a rest station for travelers. Clean beds, hot meals, fair prices. Constance Morrison's eyebrows rose toward her hairline. A woman alone, running a boarding house. A rest station, Maeve corrected mildly. Not a boarding house. Travelers stay one night, 2 at most, then they move on. Like everyone moves on. She didn't add, like everyone always had. That afternoon, she nailed a wooden sign to the post outside her cabin. The letters were neat and firm. Dustwater Rest Station, clean beds, hot meals, fair prices, no credit extended, no personal questions answered, Proprietor M. Callahan. By evening, a small crowd had gathered to read it. The women tisked at the audacity, the men scratched their heads at the oddity, and the children giggled at the height of the woman visible through the window, standing on a chair to hang curtains. The following morning, Maeve found additions to her sign. Someone had scrawled "No Husbands Wanted" in charcoal beneath her neat lettering. She studied it for a moment, then went inside for her tools. When she emerged, she carried a smaller board and more nails. The crowd that gathered this time was larger. They watched as she affixed the new board below the vandalized one. In the same neat hand, it read, "No husband wanted, no company sought, tea available." A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the onlookers. Maeve turned to face them, her gray eyes steady as she surveyed the assembled townsfolk. She stood there in her work dress, practical brown wool patched at the elbows, with her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her hands marked by the honest toll of labor. "The rest station will open next Monday," she announced. $2 a night includes supper and breakfast. Clean water for washing, stable for horses, extra 4 bits. No liquor served, no gambling permitted. Anyone unable to conduct themselves with proper decorum will be asked to leave. Sheriff Dawson pushed through the crowd, his badge catching the morning sun. A fair man by frontier standards. He'd kept the peace in Dustwater for near a decade. "Miss Callahan, while we appreciate enterprise in our town, I feel obliged to point out the challenges a woman alone might face running such an establishment." Maeve's gaze didn't waver. "I appreciate your concern. Sheriff, I've faced challenges before. I find they grow smaller when met directly. Still," he persisted, "there are rough sorts passing through. Men who don't respect boundaries will find themselves sleeping in the desert." She turned back to her door. "Good day to you all. I have work to finish." The crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with opinions. In the saloon that night, bets were laid on how long she'd last. A week, said some. A month at the outside, claimed others. Hiram Watts, who'd seen his share of determined women in his 70 years, put his money on her making it through winter. "That kind of steel in her backbone don't bend easy," he declared, slamming his whiskey glass on the bar. "You mark me, boys. That woman's got reasons for being here, and they're iron strong. She'll outlast half you gossiping hens." Maeve, unaware of the wagering on her future, worked late into the night. She'd scrubbed the floors until her knees were raw, patched the walls where wind whistled through, and reinforced the door with a heavy bar that could be lowered from inside. The stable still needed work, but it would hold for now, as she finally allowed herself to rest. Sitting in one of the repaired chairs with a cup of bitter tea, she gazed around the cabin that would be her fortress against the world. Not a home she'd learned not to think in such terms, but a place where she could exist on her own terms, where her height was an asset for reaching high shelves rather than a curiosity for small-minded folk to gawk at, where no man would promise her forever only to leave when he found someone more suitable to his tastes. Someone smaller, someone softer, someone who didn't remind him that the world could produce women who looked him eye to eye and refused to look away first. The tea grew cold in her hands as night pressed against the windows. Tomorrow she'd start on the stable roof. The day after, she'd whitewash the walls, step by step, task by task. She'd build something that belonged to her alone, something that couldn't be taken away by a man's changing heart or a society's narrow expectations. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert, their voices lonely and wild. Maeve listened to them sing their solitude and found a strange comfort in the sound. They survived out there, those creatures, alone but not helpless, wary but not weak. She would survive too. The storm arrived 3 weeks after Maeve opened her rest station, rolling in from the north with the kind of purposeful malice that turned October skies the color of old pewter. She'd seen it building all day, clouds stacking like shuffled cards against the horizon, the air growing thick and strange. Her few guests had departed that morning, eager to reach Santa Fe before the weather turned, leaving her alone with the approaching tempest. By afternoon, the first snowflakes began to fall, fat and lazy at first, then driven horizontal by winds that screamed through the gaps she hadn't yet sealed. Maeve brought in extra firewood, secured the shutters, and settled in to wait it out. She'd weathered storms before, meteorological and otherwise. This was just another test of her resolve. The knock came near sunset, though the sun itself had long been swallowed by the storm. At first, she thought it was just debris hitting the door, a branch, perhaps torn from one of the cottonwoods. But it came again, deliberate if weak. 3 knocks, then silence. Maeve approached the door with the caution of a woman who'd learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought glad tidings. She lifted the bar and opened it a crack, prepared to slam it shut if needed. What she saw made her grip the door frame. A man slumped against the post, more shadow than substance in the swirling snow. His hat was gone, dark hair plastered to his skull, coat torn at the shoulder revealing a shirt that might once have been white, but now showed rust-colored stains. He'd managed to tie his horse, a raw-boned bay that looked as exhausted as its rider, to the porch rail, but the effort seemed to have cost him his remaining strength. He lifted his head, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. Angular features marked by exhaustion, skin pale beneath the weathering of sun and wind, a week's worth of beard shadowing his jaw. But it was his eyes that held her gray-green like sage after rain, focused on her with an intensity that suggested he was using will alone to remain upright. "Ma'am," he managed, voice rough as sandpaper. "I don't mean to trouble you, just need shelter for the horse. I can sleep in the stable." He swayed, caught himself against the post, and she saw how his left leg barely held his weight. The rust-colored stains on his shirt made more sense now, blood, old and new mixed together. "Don't be foolish," she heard herself say. "You'll freeze to death before morning." "Been through worse," he said, which might have sounded like bravado if not for the matter-of-fact way he said it, like stating the sky was blue or water was wet. "I've got money. Pay for the horse's keep." He fumbled at his coat, seeking what she assumed was a purse or wallet. The movement unbalanced him. He would have fallen if she hadn't stepped forward, catching his arm. Through the wet coat, she felt the unnatural heat of fever, the trembling of muscles pushed beyond endurance. "Inside," she ordered. "Now." The horse. "We'll survive 5 minutes more while I keep you from dying on my porch and bringing the sheriff to my door." Something that might have been amusement flickered in those sage-green eyes. "Yes, ma'am." She half-supported, half-dragged him inside. He was tall, she actually had to look up slightly, which happened so rarely it momentarily distracted her. But height didn't equal substance, not in his current state. She deposited him in the chair nearest the fire and went back for his saddlebags, thrown over the bay's back. The horse regarded her with the patient exhaustion of an animal that had given all it had. She led it to the stable, removed its tack with practiced efficiency, rubbed it down as best she could in the growing storm, and left it with hay and water. The saddlebags she carried inside. The man hadn't moved from the chair, though his eyes tracked her movements. Up close, in the firelight, she could see the lines that pain had etched around his eyes and mouth. His left hand pressed against his ribs in a way that suggested damage beneath the torn shirt. "What's your name?" she asked, setting his saddlebags by the door. Devlin, Reese Devlin. Mr. Devlin, you need those wet clothes off before fever takes you completely. He nodded, but made no move to comply. She realized he likely couldn't manage the buttons with hands shaking from cold and exhaustion. This was where another woman might have called for help, summoned the doctor or the sheriff, or at least a neighbor woman to preserve proprieties. But Maeve had long ago stopped caring what was proper when weighed against what was necessary. Can you stand? He tried, made it halfway, sank back. The brief effort left him grayer than before. She made a decision. I'm going to help you. No arguments. Wasn't planning any, he murmured. She got him out of the coat first, noting how he bit back sound when the movement pulled at whatever injury hid beneath his shirt. The shirt itself was a lost cause, cut it away to reveal a bandage wrapped inexpertly around his ribs, soaked through with blood gone brown. An older wound, then, that had reopened. His boots came off to reveal feet rubbed raw from too many miles traveled too fast. Through it all, he neither protested nor made unseemly suggestions. He simply endured. Those green sage eyes fixed on some middle distance as if his mind had retreated to a place where the body's pains couldn't follow. She'd seen that look before. During the war, men came back wearing it like a second skin. Soldier, she asked, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. Once, the word came out flat, discouraging further inquiry. She brought water, heated on the stove, and clean cloth torn from her own petticoats. This needs tending. Tomorrow, he said, when I can pay the doctor. Tonight, she countered. Before infection sets in worse than it already has. Or would you prefer to die dramatically and leave me to explain a corpse to Sheriff Dawson? That ghost of amusement again. Wouldn't want to inconvenience you, ma'am. She unwrapped the bandage carefully, revealing a wound that had once been neat a knife. From the look of it, but had been mistreated by hard riding and poor care. Red streaks radiated from the edges. Not good, but she'd seen worse. This will hurt, she warned. I know. She cleaned the wound with whiskey from her medicinal supplies, felt him go rigid but heard no sound. His control was absolute, trained into him by whatever crucible had forged that 1,000-yard stare. She worked quickly, efficiently, rebandaging with clean cloth. There, that should hold until the doctor can do better. Thank you. He paused, seeming to truly see her for the first time. You've done this before. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. My father was a doctor. I helped during the war when the wounded came through Kansas. Which side? The wounded didn't wear their politics on their faces, just their pain. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. She brought him broth-thin stuff made from the bones of yesterday's chicken and bread. He managed half before exhaustion won. She watched his eyes flutter closed, then snap open as if remembering where he was. I'll sleep in the stable, he said again. You'll sleep where you won't die and create problems for me. She replied firmly, There's a cot in the back room. No one else is staying tonight. Your reputation is my concern, not yours. She helped him to the small room, settling him on the cot she kept for emergencies. He was asleep before she'd finished covering him with quilts, his face finally relaxing from its rigid control. Standing in the doorway, Maeve studied her unexpected guest. Everything about him spoke of hard use, the calluses on his hands, the scars she'd glimpsed on his chest and arms, the way he'd automatically positioned himself to see both door and window, even in his exhaustion. A man running from something, or towards something, or perhaps both. Not her concern, she told herself firmly. Come morning, when the storm cleared, he'd be on his way. She'd doctor him, feed him, take his money, and send him off like every other traveler who passed through her station. No attachments, no complications. But as she returned to the main room, she found herself moving quietly so as not to disturb his sleep. Found herself checking that she'd properly secured his horse, that his saddlebags were safely out of the wet. Small kindnesses that cost nothing but reminded her that she hadn't yet succeeded in turning her heart to stone, no matter how much easier that would make things. The storm raged on, sealing them inside a world reduced to firelight and wind howl. Maeve sat by the fire, mending a torn pillowcase by lamplight. But her thoughts kept drifting to the back room where Rhys Devlin fought whatever demons visited wounded men in their sleep. She'd meant what she told him. She'd treated plenty of wounded during the war, blue and gray alike. But there was something different about this one. Maybe it was the way he'd asked for nothing beyond shelter for his horse, or how he'd tried to pay even while burning with fever. Maybe it was the absence of swagger or assumption in his manner, the quiet way he'd accepted help when he couldn't manage alone. Or maybe it was just that look in his eyes, not the dead stare of a man who'd given up, but the careful guard of one who'd learned that hope was a luxury he couldn't afford but couldn't quite stop carrying anyway. Near midnight, she heard him stirring, the sound of fevered dreams turning dark. She'd heard such sounds before, men reliving battles, calling for comrades who'd never answer again. She rose, entered the back room quietly. He'd thrown off the quilts, hands clenched in the sheets, sweat beading his forehead despite the room's chill. She couldn't make out the words he muttered, but the tone was clear urgency. Regret, the kind of guilt that gnawed at good men who'd survived when others hadn't. She wrung out a cloth in cool water, laid it across his forehead. At her touch, his eyes flew open, hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, for a heartbeat. She saw wildness there, the cornered animal look of a man between sleeping and waking. "Easy," she said softly. "You're safe. Just fever dreams." Recognition flooded back. He released a breath that shuddered out of him, sank back against the pillow. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" "No need for apologies. Rest now." She turned to go, but his voice, rough with sleep and fever, stopped her. "Why?" "Why what?" "Why help me? You don't know me. Could be I'm trouble you don't need." She considered her answer. "Maybe you are, but right now, you're just a man who needed shelter in a storm. Tomorrow can sort out the rest." He studied her in the dim light. "Most people aren't that simple, or that kind." "I'm not most people. Mr. Devlin, now sleep. Morning will come soon enough." She left him then, returning to her chair by the fire. But she knew, with the instinct that had served her well through disappointment and betrayal, that morning would not be as simple as she'd claimed. Rhys Devlin had brought more than snow and wind to her door. He'd brought the kind of complications she'd sworn to avoid. 2 days passed before the fever broke. Rhys Devlin woke on the third morning to find weak sunlight streaming through the window and his head clear for the first time since he'd stumbled onto Maeve Callahan's porch. The storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a world wrapped in pristine white that hurt to look at directly. He lay still, taking inventory. The fire in his ribs had subsided to a dull ache. His legs felt weak but functional. The bone-deep cold that had driven him to seek shelter had been replaced by simple exhaustion. He'd survived worse, but not by much. The door opened quietly, and she entered carrying a basin and fresh bandages. In the morning light, he got his first clear look at the woman who'd pulled him back from the edge. Tall Lord. She was tall, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, and gray eyes that missed nothing. Her dress was simple brown wool, patched but clean, and she moved with the economical grace of someone accustomed to hard work. "You're awake?" she observed, setting the basin on the small table beside the cot. "And clear-eyed? Good. How long?" 2 days. The fever was stubborn." She gestured to his bandaged ribs. "That needs changing." He nodded, pushed himself to sitting despite the protest from his muscles. She worked in silence, her touch clinical but gentle. The wound looked better, the angry red streaks had faded, the edges beginning to knit properly. "You've likely saved my life," he said when she finished. "Likely," she agreed without false modesty. "The question now is what you plan to do with it." He met her steady gaze. "Move on, soon as I'm able. The doctor should look at that wound first, and your horse needs rest. He was near done in when you arrived. I can't impose further. $3 a day for room and board, she interrupted. 4 bits extra for the horse, same as any guest. You'll stay until you're fit to travel without undoing my work and wasting my effort. There was logic in that he couldn't argue with, "Yes, ma'am." She stood, gathering the old bandages. "Can you manage the main room? There's food waiting." He could, though it took effort. The main room was warmer, the fire crackling cheerfully in the stone hearth. She'd set a plate on the table legs, biscuit, a slice of ham. Simple fare that smelled like heaven to a man who'd been living on jerky and determination. She poured coffee, strong and black, then surprised him by sitting across the table with her own cup. Most women would have maintained distance, preserving propriety. But then, most women wouldn't have stripped a stranger and tended his wounds either. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Colorado, originally. Been drifting since the war ended." "Cattle work?" "Sometimes. Ranch hand, horse breaking, whatever pays." He paused. "You're not from here either." "Kansas." She offered nothing more. They sat in companionable silence while he ate. He found himself studying her when she looked away, the determined set of her jaw, the capable hands wrapped around her coffee cup, the way she held herself like someone ready to face whatever came next. A woman with walls built high and thick. He recognized the type. He'd built similar walls himself. When he finished eating, she rose and began clearing the table. "There's wood needs splitting, if you feel up to it later. Nothing strenuous, doctor's orders take precedence, but you'll heal faster with light activity than lying abed. You trust me with an axe?" She glanced back, one eyebrow raised. "Should I not? Just seems risky, taking in a stranger, especially for a woman alone." "Mr. Devlin, I've run this station for 3 weeks now. I've had drifters, cowboys, traveling merchants, even a theater troupe heading to San Francisco. Some were gentlemen, some weren't, but I've found that men who try to pay for their horses' shelter while bleeding in a snowstorm tend toward the former category." He felt his mouth twitch toward what might have been a smile. Fair point. By afternoon, he'd managed to split a modest pile of kindling, working slowly to avoid pulling the wound. The familiar rhythm felt good after days of inactivity. His horse, recovered enough to show interest in the world, whickered at him from the stable. "He's a good animal," Maeve said, appearing with a bucket of grain. "Loyal. Not many would have carried a rider so far in that condition." "Bought him off a man in Denver. Said he was too ugly to sell to anyone else." Reese ran a hand along the bay's neck. "Figured we'd suit each other." Both functional rather than pretty. He looked at her sharply, but there was no mockery in her expression. Just observation. "Something like that." She fed the horse, movements sure and practiced. "I had a mare once, beautiful thing, black as midnight with a star on her forehead. Someone gave her to me as a wedding gift." Her voice went carefully neutral. "Had to sell her when I left Kansas. Practical decision, but I still dream about her sometimes." He heard the weight in those words. Someone, wedding gift, had to sell. A story there, one that explained the walls and the solitary life. He didn't press. People came west carrying all manner of ghosts. The polite thing was to let them rest. The afternoon brought visitors. Word had spread that Maeve had taken in an injured stranger during the storm, and curiosity ran high in a town starved for novelty. First came Mrs. Morrison from the Mercantile, ostensibly delivering an order of flour, but clearly hoping for gossip. "My goodness, Mr. Devlin." Reese applied from his seat by the fire, not rising. Let her think him too weak for courtesy. "Mr. Devlin, what a terrible ordeal you must have endured, and how fortunate you found Miss Callahan's establishment." "Very fortunate," he agreed blandly. "Mrs. Morrison waited for more, but neither Reese nor Maeve obliged. after a few more attempts at conversation that hit walls of polite non-response. She departed with her intelligence-gathering mission largely failed. Sheriff Dawson arrived an hour later, his visit more official in nature. He studied Reese with lawman's eyes, taking in details that might match wanted posters or past troubles. "Don't believe we've met, Mr. Devlin. You passing through?" Storm changed my plans some." "Where from?" "Most recent Denver. Before that, various points south and west. Cattle work, among other things." The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly at the nonspecific answer. "Well, we run a peaceful town here. No tolerance for troublemakers or men running from past misdeeds." "Good to know," Reese said evenly. "I'll be sure to avoid both making trouble and running, leastways until my ribs heal up." Maeve stepped between them, subtle but deliberate. "Mr. Devlin is a paying guest. Sheriff, unless you have specific concerns, I'd appreciate you letting him convalesce in peace." "Just doing my job, Miss Callahan, making sure you're not harboring anyone unsavory." "I appreciate your diligence. Now, did you need lodging a meal, or were you just passing by?" The dismissal was polite but unmistakable. Dawson touched his hat. "Just passing by. Ma'am, Mr. Devlin. I trust we'll have no problems during your stay." "None from me, Sheriff." After he left, Maeve stood by the window, watching his departure. "He'll be checking the wanted posters." "Won't find anything." Reese shifted, trying to ease the ache in his ribs. "I've done things I'm not proud of, but none that would interest the law." She turned from the window, studying him. "We all have things we're not proud of. Mr. Devlin, the trick is not letting them define us." That evening, as she prepared supper, he found himself talking more than he had in months. Maybe it was the simple domesticity of the scene, her moving efficiently around the kitchen area while he kept the fire fed. Maybe it was the way she listened without judgment, offering occasional comments but never pressing for more than he offered. He told her about the ranch in Colorado where he'd grown up, about joining the cavalry young and eager, about watching that eagerness die in mud and blood. He spoke of friends lost, of the peculiar loneliness of surviving when better men hadn't, of drifting because staying still meant thinking too much. She listened while she worked, her own walls lowering just enough to share small pieces in return. Her father, the doctor, who'd wanted sons but got one tall daughter instead. Learning medicine at his side because what else was there for a girl who stood eye to eye with most men, the war bringing purpose, then peace bringing emptiness. "And Kansas?" he asked carefully. Her hands stilled in their work. "Kansas was a mistake I've corrected. This is better. Clear expectations, honest transactions. No one stays long enough to disappoint or be disappointed." He understood that, the safety of impermanence, the comfort of surfaces that never deepened into dangerous territories like trust or affection. Yet here they sat, sharing a meal and conversation like people who might matter to each other, given time and chance. Dangerous thinking. "I should be well enough to travel in a few days," he said. "The doctor will determine that tomorrow." She rose to clear the dishes. "Your money's good either way. Mr. Devlin, stay or go as suits you." But something in the set of her shoulders suggested the answer mattered more than her words allowed. And something in his chest, not the healing wound, but something deeper suggested it mattered to him too. That night, she showed him exercises to keep his body from stiffening while the wound healed, movements learned from watching her father work with the injured men. He followed her instructions carefully, noting how she maintained proper distance while still ensuring he understood each motion. "You'd have made a fine doctor yourself," he said when they finished. "Perhaps, but the world wasn't ready for lady doctors when I was young enough to learn properly. Now." She shrugged. "Now I make do with what I know." Later, lying on the cot and listening to her moving quietly in the main room, Reese found himself thinking about staying. Not forever, he'd lost the ability to think in forever somewhere between Georgia and grief. But maybe long enough to fix that stable roof properly. Maybe long enough to help with the heavier work she struggled to manage alone. Maybe long enough to learn why a woman who could have been anything chose to be alone in a forgotten town, serving tea to strangers and keeping her heart locked away like winter preserves in a cellar. He fell asleep to the sound of her voice, humming something low and sweet while she worked on her mending. It had been years since he'd fallen asleep to any sound but wind and his own breathing. It felt dangerously like peace. A week passed, then two. The doctor, a whiskey-soaked man named Holcomb, who nonetheless knew his business, pronounced Reese healing well enough to travel. But winter had settled over Dustwater like a gray wool blanket, making the roads treacherous for a lone rider. Reese paid his daily rate without complaint, splitting wood, mending harnesses, doing the dozen small tasks that kept a rest station running. They fell into a rhythm without discussing it. He rose early to tend the horses and start the fires. She cooked breakfast for whatever travelers had stayed the night. They worked in comfortable parallel through the day, him on the heavier repairs, her managing the domestic side of the business. Evenings found them sharing supper and careful conversation, two people circling each other like wary cats learning to share a barn. It was during the third week that Reese began to speak more freely about the dreams that woke him some nights. "There was a bridge in Tennessee," he said one evening, staring into the fire. "Command wanted it taken. Didn't matter that the Rebs had it mined, that we'd lose half our men trying. Orders were orders." He paused, rolling a coffee cup between his palms. "I led the charge, made it across with 6 men out of 30, held it long enough for reinforcements, but the screams of horses falling through the broken planks." He shook his head. "Some nights I still hear them." Maeve didn't offer empty comfort or platitudes about duty and honor. She simply said, "The mind holds on to strange things. I still smell ether sometimes. From the field hospitals, wake up thinking I need to boil more bandages." "You worked the hospitals?" "Behind the lines, mostly, until Antietam. After that, anywhere they'd let me help." Her voice went distant. "Boys calling for their mothers in languages I didn't recognize, holding letters they'd never send. You learn real quick that death doesn't care about uniforms or causes, just takes whoever's turn it is." They sat quietly after that, both lost in memories that had no business in a peaceful evening but insisted on intruding anyway. Finally, Reese spoke again. "Is that why you left Kansas, too many ghosts?" She considered her answer. "Partly, but mostly I left because I discovered that some betrayals cut deeper than war wounds. At least in battle. You know who your enemies are." He didn't press, but over the following days, pieces of her story emerged like artifacts washing up after a flood. A charming man named Theodore Marsh who'd courted the tall doctor's daughter with pretty words and prettier promises. A wedding that was the talk of Lawrence. Kansas, the belle who'd never fit anywhere, finally finding someone who didn't mind looking up at his bride. "He minded, though," she said one afternoon while they worked to repair a shutter damaged by wind. "Just hit it well at first. Started with jokes how he needed a ladder to kiss me, how our children would be giants. Then the jokes got sharper. Then they weren't jokes at all." Reese held the shutter steady while she worked. "Some men can't stand feeling small." "No, they can't. Took me 2 years to realize he'd been visiting a woman in Missouri. Petite little thing, blonde, everything I wasn't. When I confronted him, he said, she drove a nail with unnecessary force. He said he'd done his duty marrying me, giving the spinster doctor's daughter respectability. But a man had needs for a real woman." The words hung in the cold air between them. Reese felt anger rise in his throat, surprising in its intensity. He was a fool. "Yes, but I was a bigger one for believing him in the first place." She stepped back to examine their work. "I took what money was mine, sold what I could, and came west, far as I could get from Kansas and still speak English. Been here 6 months now. It suits me." "Alone suits you. Alone is honest, no pretenses, no expectations to fail." She glanced at him. You understand that. He did, Lord help him. He did, but lately, working beside her, sharing these careful conversations, he'd begun to wonder if alone was the same as living, if surviving was enough when something more might be possible, even for damaged souls like theirs. The thought scared him enough that he started planning his departure. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Thomas Garrett walked into the rest station with 2 friends and trouble on his mind. Reese knew the type, young, proud. Too much whiskey and too little sense. They sprawled at the main table like they owned the place. Boots muddy, voices loud. Well, Garrett drawled, eyeing Maeve as she approached with the coffee pot. The giant lady innkeeper. Boys, I told you she was a sight. Tall enough to pick apples without a ladder. His companions laughed. Maeve's expression didn't change. $3 each if you're staying. Coffee's free with supper. Boot scraping is required. Hear that? Boys, she's giving orders. Garrett leaned back in his chair, deliberately grinding his muddy boots against the floor. Maybe someone should teach her that ain't natural. Woman giving orders to men, especially a woman built like a scarecrow in skirts. Reese set down the harness he'd been mending. Maeve caught his eye, shook her head slightly. This was her establishment, her situation to handle. Gentlemen, she said, voice steady as iron. You're welcome to food and lodging if you can behave civilly. If not, the door is behind you. Garrett stood. Using his height advantage, he had maybe an inch on her to loom. What if we don't want to be civil? What if we think this town would be better off without some mannish female pretending she's... You'll want to step back. Reese's voice came out quiet, conversational almost. He hadn't moved from his seat, but something in his tone made Garrett's friend shift nervously. The lady asked you polite. I won't. Garrett turned, took in Reese's worn-in clothes and healing posture. This your guard dog. Miss High and Mighty keeping a broke-down saddle tramp for protection. I don't need protection, Maeve said. Mister, Devlin is a guest, same as you could be if you minded your manners. Manners. Garrett spit the word like something foul. Where I come from, women know their place. They sure don't stand tall as a man and act like... Reese moved. Not fast. His ribs wouldn't allow that. But with economy of purpose that spoke of long practice. One moment he was seated. The next he stood between Garrett and Maeve, close enough that Garrett had to step back or crane his neck. Where I come from, Reese said softly. Men who can't speak respectfully to ladies get educated real quick. Now, Miss Callahan's been patient with you, more patient than you deserve. You can apologize and leave, or you can leave through the window. Your choice. Garrett's hand twitched toward his gun belt. Reese smiled, the expression nowhere near his eyes. Go ahead, give me a reason. The moment stretched taut. Then one of Garrett's friends grabbed his arm. Come on, Tom. Ain't worth it? Place probably has fleas anyway. They left, Garrett muttering threats and promises about coming back. Maeve locked the door behind them, then stood with her forehead pressed against the wood. You all right? Reese asked. She turned, and he saw her hands trembling slightly. Not fear, he realized. Anger. I had it handled. I know. I don't need protecting. I've dealt with worse than him. I know that too. She studied him, gray eyes searching. Then why? He considered his words carefully. Because nobody should have to stand alone all the time, even folks who are good at it. He paused. And because he had no call to speak to you that way? Man talks like that. He needs educating. You could have been hurt. Your ribs are healing fine. Besides, he allowed himself a slight smile. I've faced down worse than 3 drunk cowboys. Usually there were more of them and they were shooting back. She laughed, surprising them both a short, sharp sound like ice cracking. You're a strange man, Reese Devlin. Been told that before. They stood there, closer than they'd been since she'd tended his wounds. He could see the pulse in her throat, the way afternoon light caught copper threads in her hair. For a moment, possibilities hummed in the air between them. Then she stepped back, walls sliding back into place. "Thank you for intervening, even if I didn't need it." "You're welcome, even if you didn't need it." That night over supper, she was quieter than usual. "Finally." She set down her fork and looked at him directly. "They'll make trouble over this. Garrett's not the type to let it go." "Probably. It might be better if you moved on, before things escalate." He met her gaze steadily. "Might be, is that what you want?" She looked away first. "What I want hasn't mattered much in my life. I deal with what is." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." But later, as he lay on his cot listening to the wind test the walls they'd reinforced together, he thought about the way she'd laughed, how for just that moment, her walls had come down completely, showing the woman underneath who could still find humor in absurdity, who wasn't as resigned to solitude as she claimed. He thought about leaving, about the road waiting once the weather cleared, about drifting to the next town, the next temporary job, the next place where he didn't matter to anyone and no one mattered to him. Then he thought about Maeve facing the Thomas Garretts of the world alone, and found he couldn't make the image sit right in his mind. "Not yet," he said to the darkness. "Not just yet." Outside, snow began to fall again, sealing them into their strange domestic arrangement for at least a few more days. Reese listened to it whisper against the windows and admitted, if only to himself, that he was in no hurry for spring. Some prisons, after all, were of our own making, and sometimes, if we were very lucky, we found someone else who understood the architecture of those walls and maybe, just maybe, knew how to build a door. The morning Reese planned to leave dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline winter day that made the desert seem carved from glass. He'd settled his bill the night before, counting out the money with careful precision while Maeve watched from across the table. Neither had mentioned that he'd accumulated enough credit from his work to offset most of the cost. The money was a formality, a way to keep the boundaries clear between them. He saddled his horse in the pre-dawn darkness, moving quietly through the familiar motions. The bay was rested, well-fed, ready for the road. Reese's ribs had healed to a dull ache that wouldn't slow him much. There was no reason to stay, no excuse that wouldn't sound like what it was a man grasping for reasons to remain where he wasn't needed. The cabin door opened behind him. He didn't turn, but his hands stilled on the saddle straps. "Coffee's ready," Maeve said. "Road's long to anywhere from here." He should have mounted up, tipped his hat, ridden off into the sunrise like every other drifter who'd passed through her station. Instead, he found himself following her inside, hanging his hat on the peg by the door like he'd done every morning for weeks. She poured coffee, thick and black, into 2 cups. They stood in the kitchen, not sitting, both understanding this was a farewell that shouldn't be prolonged. "Where will you go?" she asked. "South, maybe. Heard there's work in the Prescott mines." "Hard work for a man with healing ribs." "They'll hold." She nodded, sipping her coffee. In the early light, he could see fatigue in the lines around her eyes. Business had been slow since the Garrett incident. Word had a way of spreading in small towns, and some folks had decided the rest station was more trouble than convenience. "You could stay," she said suddenly, then seemed surprised by her own words. "Through winter, at least. The stable roof needs proper fixing, and there's the fence line, and... Maeve..." She stopped, set down her cup with careful precision. "You're right. Foolish thought." "Not foolish, just complicated." "Yes," she straightened, walls rebuilding themselves brick by brick. "Well, safe travels, Mr. Devlin." He finished his coffee, set the cup on the scarred wooden counter, walked to the door, put on his hat. His hand was on the latch when he heard himself speak. "That man in Kansas, your husband, he was wrong." She didn't answer, but he heard her breath catch. "Not just about leaving, about all of it. Man lucky enough to have a woman look at him straight. Speak truth. Stand beside him, literally beside him, and he threw it away because his pride couldn't take it. His failing, not yours. Reese needed saying. He opened the door, stepped into the cold morning. Take care of yourself, Maeve Callahan. He made it to the property line before stopping. The road stretched ahead, empty and familiar. He'd traveled 100 like it, would travel 100 more, each one leading to another temporary stop, another place where he didn't matter, another set of faces that would blur into all the rest. Behind him lay a cabin with a woman who made terrible coffee but excellent biscuits, who faced down drunks with steady eyes, who understood the weight of other people's blood on your hands. A woman who'd offered him honest work and quiet companionship and asked for nothing but the same in return. "Damn," he said to his horse. "Damn and double damn." The bay snorted, unimpressed by human indecision. Reese sat there as the sun climbed higher, frost melting from the sage. He thought about pride and fear and the walls people built to keep pain out that mostly just kept life from getting in. He thought about Maeve standing alone in her kitchen, rebuilding her defenses against another leaving. Then he turned the horse around. She was still in the kitchen when he walked back in, standing exactly where he'd left her. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. "Stable roof won't fix itself," he said, "and you make terrible coffee. Someone should teach you better." She stopped, tried again. "The coffee's fine." "It's awful. Tastes like you're trying to tan leather from the inside." He hung his hat back on the peg. "Also, your kindling's too big. Burn's inefficient. And that front shutter's still loose. Are you critiquing my establishment? Figuring if I'm staying through winter, might as well do things right." She stared at him. "Why?" The simple question deserved a simple answer, but he didn't have one. Not one that wouldn't reveal too much, risk too much. So he told a different truth. "Because Thomas Garrett will be back. Men like that always come back. And because your fence line really does need work. And because—" He met her eyes. "Because I'm tired of roads that don't lead anywhere." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, $3 a day for room and board. "Highway robbery. I'm doing skilled labor. $2.50 and you fix the coffee situation." "Deal." Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around the edges. "I'll need to move some things, make proper quarters. Can't have you on that cot all winter." "The tack room would suit. Already spent worse winters in worse places." "We'll see." She turned away, busying herself with breakfast preparations. "Since you're staying, might as well eat. Can't fix roofs on an empty stomach." He settled at the table, watching her work. The morning sun slanted through the windows they'd sealed together, falling across her hands as she sliced bread. Measured coffee badly moved through the space they'd been sharing like strangers for weeks. "I'm not easy to live with," she said without turning around. "I have particular ways. I don't like changes to my routine. I won't tolerate drinking or coarse behavior. And I absolutely will not." "Maeve." She stopped. "I'm not looking to live with you, just near you. Work for wages, fix what needs fixing, maybe teach you to make decent coffee. Come spring, we see where things stand. No promises, no expectations, just time." She turned then, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Hope. Maybe, though carefully banked like a fire that might burn too hot if given air. "Time," she repeated. "Yes, I suppose we could try that." They settled back into routine, but it was different now. The decision to stay had shifted something between them, added weight to small moments. When their hands brushed passing tools, neither pulled away quite as quickly. When evening found them by the fire, the silence felt less like armor and more like companionship. A week later, Reese had converted the tack room into simple but comfortable quarters. His few possessions looked sparse in the space, but it was clean, dry, and private. More important, It maintained the proprieties that kept the town gossips from having too much ammunition. Not that they weren't talking anyway. Reese heard the whispers when he went to town for supplies. The broken-down drifter and the spinster innkeeper. Two misfits finding each other. Some romantic souls thought it sweet. Others, like the widow Pearson, who'd appointed herself moral guardian of Dustwater, predicted dire outcomes. "Mark my words," she pronounced at the mercantile, loud enough for Reese to hear 3 aisles over. "No good comes from arrangements like that. A man and woman, neither married. Sharing property, it's unseemly." "They're not sharing," Samuel Morrison pointed out mildly. "He's hired help, boards in the stable." "So he says." Her sniff conveyed volumes about what she thought of such claims. Reese paid for his purchases and left without comment. Let them talk. He'd heard worse in army camps and trail towns. What mattered was the work good. Honest work that left him tired enough to sleep without dreams. What mattered was evening conversations that had begun to range beyond careful surfaces into deeper waters. "Do you ever think about after?" Maeve asked one night. They'd been discussing the war, the strange dislocation of peace after years of conflict. "After what?" "After whatever comes next. After we're done drifting, done hiding, done pretending we're content with just surviving." He considered. "Used to had it all planned once, little ranch in the hill country. Few horses, maybe some cattle. Nothing grand, just enough." "What happened to that plan?" "War happened. Then Margaret happened. Then I learned plans were just ways to disappoint yourself in advance." She looked up from her mending. Margaret. He'd never spoken the name aloud to her before. It tasted bitter on his tongue. "Girl back in Colorado, waited for me all through the war. Letters full of promises. When I came home with a limp and nightmares, she decided she'd waited for someone who didn't exist anymore. Married a banker 2 months later. Can't say I blamed her." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She did us both a favor. Would have been worse, trying to pretend I was who she remembered." They lapsed into silence, but it was the comfortable kind. After a while, Maeve spoke again. "I used to plan too. Children, mostly. House full of them. Tall like me, learning medicine from their grandfather. Seemed possible once. Still could be." She shook her head. "That window closed. Theodore made sure I understood that. No man wants giant children from a woman who already makes him feel small. His words, not mine." The bitterness in her voice made Reese want to find Theodore Marsh and educate him about exactly how small he really was. Instead, he said, "Theodore was a fool and a coward. Any man worth having would be proud to stand beside you." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them that made his chest tight. But before either could speak, hoofbeats sounded outside multiple riders, coming fast. Reese was on his feet instantly, old instincts taking over. He peered through the window, hand moving automatically toward the gun he kept nearby. "Garrett," he said quietly. "Brought friends." The riders thundered past without stopping, whooping and firing shots into the air. Reese tracked them through the window until they disappeared toward town, tension slowly easing from his shoulders. "Just liquored up and showing off," he said, but didn't move away from his vantage point. Maeve had gone very still, the way a deer does when sensing predators. "They'll be back. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Men like that don't forget being made to look small." She was right, of course. Reese had seen it too many times, pride wounded in public, festering into something meaner. But for now, the danger had passed, leaving behind an electric awareness of how quickly peace could shatter. "I should teach you to shoot," he said. "I know how to shoot. My father made sure of that." "Show me." She fetched an old Spencer carbine from her room, handling it with the competence of long familiarity. "Haven't fired it in months. Probably needs cleaning." He examined the weapon, found it well maintained despite her claims. "You're full of surprises. Maeve Callahan. A woman alone needs to be..." She took the rifle back, returned it to its place. though I prefer to avoid situations where shooting becomes necessary. Sometimes situations don't give you that choice. They settled back by the fire, but the easy mood was broken. The gulf between them seemed suddenly wider, him with his soldier's instincts, her with her determined pacifism. Yet when she finally bid him good night, she paused at her door. "Thank you for being watchful." "It's what I do," he said simply. Winter deepened, bringing a succession of gray days that blurred into each other. Business at the rest station had slowed to a trickle, a few hardy travelers. The occasional local seeking Maeve's medical knowledge for ailments Doc Holcomb was too drunk to treat properly. Reese used the quiet time to make improvements, reinforcing doors, adding shutters that could be barred from inside, creating clear fields of fire from the windows without making the place look like a fortress. Maeve noticed, but didn't comment, just as she didn't comment on how he'd taken to walking the perimeter each evening before retiring, or how he'd moved his bedroll where he could hear anyone approaching the main cabin. They lived beside each other in careful parallel, close enough to share warmth but not touch. It was during one of those long winter evenings that she asked the question he'd been dreading. "Why did you really stay?" He was oiling harness leather, hands busy with familiar work. "Told you, roof needed fixing." "The roof's been fixed for 2 weeks." "Fence line, then—" "Reese." He set down the harness, met her steady gaze. "You want the truth?" "If you're willing to give it." He thought about deflecting, making a joke, changing the subject. Instead, he found himself speaking words he hadn't planned. "Because when I rode away that morning, I got to the property line and realized something. I've been riding away from things my whole life. From home when it got too small. From the army when the war ended. From Colorado when Margaret made her choice. Always riding away. Never toward." She waited, that particular stillness that invited confession. "Then I met you," he continued. "A woman who'd been left, who'd done her own riding away, who'd built walls so high and thick nothing could get through, and I thought—" He paused, searching for words. "I thought maybe two people who'd given up on Tord could just be still together, not going anywhere, not expecting anything, just being." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind moaned around the corners of the cabin, testing the places they'd sealed against drafts. "That's a lonely way to live," she said finally. "Less lonely than the alternative." "Is it?" She set aside her mending, hands folding in her lap. "I tell myself that every day, that this is better, safer, cleaner than hoping for things that won't come. But sometimes I catch myself thinking dangerous thoughts, like how your coffee actually is better than mine, or how the cabin feels warmer when you're fixing something in the next room, or how I don't mind anymore that you can see over my head." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Dangerous thoughts for a woman who's sworn off such foolishness. The air between them shifted, charged with possibilities neither quite dared name. Reese felt his carefully maintained distance wavering, wanting to close the space between them, to discover if her hands were as capable of gentleness as competence. Instead, he picked up the harness again. "Nothing foolish about good coffee." She laughed, that rare, unguarded sound he'd come to treasure. "No, I suppose not." They returned to their separate tasks. But something had changed. The walls were still there, but they'd developed windows, places where light could get in, where two wary souls could glimpse what might be possible if they ever found the courage to unlock the doors. February brought an unexpected thaw, melting the snow and turning the roads to muddy soup. With it came a traveler neither of them expected, a woman alone, driving a small cart pulled by a tired mule. She arrived near sunset, clothes travel-stained but quality, face marked by exhaustion and something else. Fear, maybe, or determination worn thin. "Please," she said when Maeve answered her knock. "I need a room. I can pay." "Of course. Come in. You look done in." The woman she gave her name as Mrs. Sarah Winters nearly collapsed at the table. Maeve brought coffee and soup while Reese tended to her mule and cart. When he returned, he caught Maeve's eye, nodded toward the door. They stepped outside. "She's running from something," he said quietly. "I know. Could bring trouble." Maeve's chin lifted. "She's a woman alone who needs help. That's all that matters tonight." He didn't argue, though his instincts prickled with warning. They went back inside to find Mrs. Winters crying silently into her soup, shoulders shaking with the effort to contain her sobs. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I don't mean to. It's been a difficult journey." "No apologies needed," Maeve said, sitting beside her. "Eat, rest. Everything else can wait for morning." But morning brought what Reese had feared: a man on horseback, asking after a woman matching Mrs. Winters' description. He was well-dressed, soft-spoken, with the kind of careful charm that made Reese's neck hair stand up. "My wife," the man explained to Maeve, hat in hand, smile perfectly calibrated. "Poor dear gets confused sometimes. Wanders off. I'm quite worried about her." Reese stayed in the stable, visible but not interfering, watching how the man's eyes kept shifting, cataloging exits and weaknesses. "I haven't seen anyone matching that description," Maeve lied smoothly. "You might try in town. Someone there may have noticed her." The man's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Of course, though I'm surprised. This is the only lodging for miles, and she would need somewhere to rest." He looked around slowly, taking in the cabin, the stable, Reese's presence. "You're sure she hasn't been here?" "Quite sure." "I see." He replaced his hat. "Well, if she does appear, please send word to town. Edwin Marsh is the name. I'm staying at the hotel, quite desperate to find her. For her own safety. You understand. She's not, well." After he left, Reese joined Maeve in the cabin. Mrs. Winters was hidden in the back room, trembling. "Marsh," Maeve said, and her voice was strange. "He said his name was Marsh." "You know him." "No, but—" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is keeping her safe until we can figure out how to help her." Mrs. Winters. Sarah finally told them the truth that evening. Edwin Marsh was her husband, but she was neither confused nor wandering. She was fleeing a man who'd controlled every aspect of her life for 5 years, who'd isolated her from family and friends, who'd convinced everyone she was fragile and hysterical while slowly tightening the bonds of her captivity. "He never struck me," she said, as if that somehow made it better. "He didn't need to. He had other ways of keeping me in line, taking things I loved, giving them back as rewards, telling everyone I was delicate, needed watching, making me doubt my own mind until I almost believed him." Maeve's knuckles were white where she gripped her coffee cup. "How did you get away?" "He went to Denver on business. I sold my mother's jewelry, took what money I could find, and ran. I thought I could reach my sister in California, but he's following. He always said he would if I tried to leave." Reese watched Maeve's face, saw her walls not just opening but crumbling. This wasn't just Sarah's story in some way. It was an echo of her own. Different methods, same cage. "You'll stay here," Maeve said firmly, "until we can arrange safe passage to California." "He won't give up," Sarah warned. "Edwin doesn't like losing possessions." "Then he'll learn disappointment," Maeve replied. "Some things aren't meant to be owned." That night, Reese took his bedroll to the main cabin, setting up near the door. "Just until this is resolved," he said when Maeve started to protest. She nodded, understanding the precaution. They were harboring a runaway wife in a time when the law sided with husbands. Righteous or not, it could cost them dearly. "Thank you," she said simply. He looked at her, tall and strong and fierce with protective anger, and felt something in his chest that had been frozen for years begin to thaw. "We protect our own," he said. "That's what partners do." The word hung between them, weightier than he'd intended. Partners. Not employer and hired hand. Not two people sharing space. Partners. Maeve held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, decisively. Yes, she said. Partners. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows they'd reinforced together. But inside, for the first time in longer than either could remember, they weren't facing the storm alone. 2 days later, Edwin Marsh returned with reinforcements, Sheriff Dawson and a man who introduced himself as Judge Holbrook from the territorial court. They arrived at midday, their horses and authority filling the yard with official menace. Miss Callahan, the sheriff began, clearly uncomfortable. We need to search your premises. Mr. Marsh has sworn a statement that his wife is being held here against her will. Maeve stood in her doorway, tall and immovable. Do you have a warrant? Judge Holbrook produced a paper with a flourish. Indeed we do. Stand aside. Miss Callahan, the law will not be obstructed. Reese emerged from the stable, positioning himself where he could watch all three men. Edwin Marsh's eyes tracked the movement. A snake calculating threats. Gentlemen, Reese said evenly. Miss Callahan runs a lawful establishment. Perhaps we could discuss this civilly. Nothing to discuss, Marsh cut in, his careful charm slipping. My wife is ill. She needs medical attention, proper care. These people are preventing me from providing it. If she's ill, Maeve said, why isn't Doc Holcomb with you? The question hung in the air. Sheriff Dawson shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew the doctor was likely unconscious in a bottle by this hour. The warrant stands. Judge Holbrook declared, search the premises. They had no choice but to allow it. Sarah was hidden in the root cellar, accessed through a concealed door Reese had discovered while reinforcing the kitchen floor. They'd moved her there at dawn, along with blankets and water, praying the space would escape notice. The search was thorough but not destructive. Sheriff Dawson's doing. Reese suspected the man was trying to walk a line between duty and decency. They examined every room, checked the stable and outbuildings, even peered into the well. Satisfied? Maeve asked when they emerged empty-handed. Marsh's face had darkened with each fruitless minute. She was here. I know it. You're hiding her somewhere. Mr. Marsh, Judge Holbrook intervened. We've searched thoroughly. Perhaps your information was incorrect. Search again, Marsh demanded. The cellar. What cellar? Sheriff Dawson asked. Cabins built on a stone foundation, no cellar access I could see. Reese kept his expression neutral, blessing the carpentry skills that had concealed the entrance so well. Marsh sputtered, insisting, growing more agitated as his certainty met reality's contradiction. Finally, Judge Holbrook had enough. Mr. Marsh, we've done our duty. Your wife is not here. I suggest we return to town and pursue other leads. But Marsh wasn't finished. His mask of civility finally cracked completely. You don't understand. She's mine, my wife, my responsibility. She can't just leave, can't just decide. He stopped, perhaps realizing how he sounded. Women have been known to travel, Maeve said coolly. Even married ones. Perhaps she went to visit family. She has no family, Marsh snapped. No friends, no one but me. I've made sure of that. The silence that followed was damning. Even Judge Holbrook looked uncomfortable at the admission. Sheriff Dawson's hand moved subtly toward his sidearm, old instincts warning of a man coming unraveled. Mr. Marsh, the sheriff said carefully, I think it's time we headed back to town. Marsh looked between them all, seeing something shift in their faces. He straightened his coat, attempted to reclaim his composure. This isn't over. I know she was here, and I know you're lying. He pointed at Maeve. Both of you. I'll be watching. After they left, Reese and Maeve waited a full hour before releasing Sarah from her hiding place. She emerged pale and shaking, cobwebs in her hair, but safe. He'll be back, Sarah said. He never gives up when he's been defied. "Let him come," Maeve replied. "He showed his true face today. Even Judge Holbrook saw it." But Reese noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she heated water for tea. The confrontation had shaken something loose in her. Old memories, perhaps. Or the realization that some battles couldn't be won by standing tall and speaking truth. That night, Reese maintained his vigil in the main cabin. Sarah slept fitfully in the back room while Maeve sat by the fire, unusually restless. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Keep thinking about what he said." "I've made sure of that." The casual cruelty of it. Cutting someone off from everyone who might help them, then acting like it's care. You knew someone like that. It wasn't a question. She stared into the fire, and he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, Theodore wasn't violent either, just diminishing. Death by 1,000 small cuts. Comments about my height, my mannerisms, my interests. Always framed as concern. "Of course. I just want what's best for you. Dear." By the end, I barely recognized myself. "But you got out." "Because he discarded me for someone more suitable. If he hadn't..." She shrugged. "Maybe I'd have ended up like Sarah, convinced I was too strange, too tall, too much to exist without someone to manage me." Reese moved from his post by the door, sat in the chair beside hers, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence. "You're not too much," he said quietly. "You're not too anything. You're exactly right, just as you are." She looked at him then, eyes bright with unshed tears. "How can you know that?" "Because I've spent months watching you face down drunk cowboys and bitter winters and sick travelers who couldn't pay. Because you took in a broken-down soldier without questions and gave him purpose again. Because you're harboring a desperate woman despite the legal consequences. Because..." He paused, weighing words. "Because when I see you, I don't see too tall or too strong or too independent. I just see Maeve." The tears spilled over then, silent streams down her cheeks. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Do what?" "Trust, hope, believe someone might stay." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand, engulfing it in his larger one. "I don't know either, but maybe we could figure it out together." They sat like that, hands linked while the fire burned low. Neither spoke of love or promises or forever. Those words were too big, too dangerous for people who'd been burned by them before. But in the quiet understanding between them, something began to grow tentative as spring grass, but just as persistent. The next morning brought unexpected allies, a delegation of townswomen, led by Constance Morrison and including even the formidable widow Pearson, arrived at the rest station. "We've come about the situation?" "Mrs." Morrison announced, settling her considerable bulk at Maeve's table. Maeve poured Coffee Reese's recipe, which drew approving nods, and waited. "That Marsh fellow," Widow Pearson said with unusual directness. "Been asking questions all over town, offering money for information about his wife, making threats when money didn't work. Threatened Sam at the Mercantile," another woman added. "Said he'd ruin his business if he found out Sam had sold supplies to her. Thing is, Mrs." Morrison continued, "we've been talking about marriages and husbands and what's proper versus what's right. And while we don't all agree on the particulars..." She glanced at the other women, received nods of support. "We agree that a man who cuts his wife off from the world, then hunts her like an animal when she runs well, that's not a man who deserves our help." "What are you saying?" Maeve asked carefully. "We're saying if a certain woman needed to catch the weekly stage to Carson City, and if she happened to be wearing widow's weeds with a thick veil, and if she happened to be traveling with a group of respectable ladies heading to a church conference..." "Mrs." Morrison smiled. "Well, who's to say who's under that veil?" The plan came together quickly. The church ladies really were traveling to Carson City for a regional Methodist conference. One more widow among them would hardly be noticed. especially if the other ladies vouched for her. From Carson City. Sarah could catch a train to California and her sister. "Why?" Sarah asked, overwhelmed. "You don't know me." "We know enough." Widow Pearson said firmly, "We know a woman should be able to leave if leaving's what's needed. Some of us learned that too late. No reason you should too." 2 days later, a group of soberly dressed women boarded the stage. Among them, a figure in black, heavily veiled, supported by sisters in faith if not in blood. Edwin Marsh was there, watching. But the wall of respectable womanhood was impenetrable. When he tried to approach, Sheriff Dawson intercepted. "Stage is full. Mr. Marsh, private charter, church business." Marsh protested, demanded to inspect the passengers. But Judge Holbrook, perhaps feeling guilty about his earlier compliance, backed the sheriff. "You can't interfere with religious folks, Mr. Marsh, not without cause, and your cause seems to have vanished." The stage rolled away in a cloud of dust. Marsh stood in the street, fists clenched, watching his possession escape. Then he turned, and his gaze found Maeve and Reese on the rest station porch. The look he gave them was pure venom. "This isn't over," he called out, loud enough for half the town to hear. "You've interfered in a legal marriage. There are consequences for harboring fugitives." "Prove it," Reese said mildly. Marsh took a step toward them, hand moving toward his coat. Several things happened at once. Reese shifted, subtle but ready. Sheriff Dawson's hand found his pistol grip, and Maeve stepped forward, placing herself between the men. Mr. Marsh," she said, voice carrying clearly. "Your wife is gone. Whether we helped or not is irrelevant now. You can waste time and money pursuing vengeance, or you can accept that some things in life don't go as planned. I recommend the latter. It's healthier." "You destroyed my marriage," he snarled. "No," she said simply. "You did that yourself. We just declined to help you drag her back to the wreckage." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Marsh spun on his heel and strode toward the hotel. He'd be back, men like him always came back, but for now, Sarah was safe. That evening, as Reese moved his bedroll back to the stable, Maeve stopped him. "Stay," she said quietly. Not that just stay in the house. It's foolish. You walking back and forth in the cold when there's a perfectly good floor by the fire." He studied her face, reading the mixture of invitation and fear there. "Just the floor by the fire. For now." She managed a small smile. "We're still figuring things out. Remember?" "I remember." So he spread his bedroll in the main room, and they spent the evening as they had so many others, her with her mending, him maintaining equipment, comfortable in shared silence. But something fundamental had shifted. The space between them no longer felt like safety. It felt like possibility. The attack came 3 days later at the weekly market. Maeve had gone to town for supplies, leaving Reese to handle repairs at the station. She was examining flour at Morrison's stall when Edwin Marsh appeared, flanked by 2 rough-looking men he'd apparently hired from the saloons. "Miss Callahan," Marsh said loudly, ensuring an audience. "Still pretending innocence." Maeve straightened, meeting his gaze steadily. "Mr. Marsh, I thought you'd return to wherever you came from." "Not until I've seen justice done." He stepped closer, his hired men moving to flank her. "You helped my wife abandon her lawful husband, stole her away like a common thief." "Nobody stole anyone," Sam Morrison interjected, moving protectively toward Maeve. "Now move along before—" One of Marsh's men shoved Morrison back, sending him stumbling into his display. Flour sacks tumbled, white dust exploding across the street. The market erupted in shouts and confusion. "You're nothing but a meddling spinster," Marsh snarled at Maeve. "An unnatural woman who couldn't keep her own husband. So you poison other marriages? Well, I'll see you brought low for it. You and that broken-down drifter you're laying with." The insult hung in the air like a slap. Maeve felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice level. Your quarrel is with me, Mr. Marsh. Leave others out of it. Others? He laughed, ugly and sharp. You mean Devlin, that coward hiding behind a woman's skirts? At least we know why you keep him around, even a mannish freak like you needs. The words cut off as Reese materialized from the crowd. He must have heard the commotion from the station, ridden hard to get there. Dust still clung to his clothes, but his expression was deadly calm. Finish that sentence, Reese said quietly. Please. Marsh's hired men shifted nervously. They'd been paid to intimidate a woman and some shopkeepers, not face down a man with the kind of stillness that preceded violence. Ah, the kept man appears, Marsh sneered, but took a step back. Come to defend your meal ticket? Reese smiled, a cold, thin thing that never touched his eyes. I'm going to give you one chance to apologize to Miss Callahan. One, after that, well, he shrugged. After that, we'll see what kind of man you really are when you're not threatening women. I don't apologize to... The punch came so fast most folks missed it. One moment Marsh was sneering, the next he was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. His hired men started forward but stopped when Reese's hand moved to his holster. Your employer seems to have fallen, he observed. Might want to help him up. Carefully. Sheriff Dawson pushed through the crowd, taking in the scene with a weary resignation. What happened here? Marsh assaulted Sam Morrison, someone called out. Then he insulted Miss Callahan something terrible. Then he fell down, another added. Real sudden like. Must have tripped. A third voice agreed. These streets are mighty uneven. The sheriff looked at Marsh, struggling to his feet with blood staining his fancy shirt. That true, Mr. Marsh. You trip. Marsh glared at the crowd, seeing no friendly faces. Even Judge Holbrook, watching from the hotel porch, offered no support. This isn't over, he snarled. I'll have the territorial marshal here. I'll see you all. You'll see yourself on the next stage out. Sheriff Dawson interrupted. You've worn out your welcome in Dustwater. Mr. Marsh, be gone by sunrise, or I'll arrest you for disturbing the peace, assault, and whatever else I can think of. You can't. I can and I am. Your business here is finished. Your wife is gone, and she's not coming back. Accept it and leave, or stay and face consequences. Your choice. Marsh looked around wildly, seeking allies and finding none. Even his hired thugs were edging away, recognizing a lost cause. Finally, he spat in the dirt at Maeve's feet, a last, petty gesture of impotent rage. This isn't over, he repeated, but the words lacked conviction now. He was a bully who'd met resistance, a small man who'd lost his favorite victim. You'll regret this, all of you. He stalked away, leaving silence in his wake. Then Mrs. Morrison began clapping, slowly and deliberately. Others joined in not raucous celebration, but acknowledgement of something important witnessed, a standing up, a standing together. Maeve felt overwhelmed by the support, by Reese's sudden appearance, by the violence that had erupted from her attempt at peaceful marketing. Thank you all, she managed. I need to get back. I'll take you, Reese said, and no one argued. They rode back to the station in silence, Maeve on the wagon seat, Reese alongside on his bay. Only when they were inside, door barred against the world, did she allow herself to shake. He could have hurt you, she said. Those men he hired could have tried. Reese poured whiskey, handed her a glass. Drink, for the nerves. She sipped, made a face. I hate violence. I know. But you hit him. Yes. Why? He considered his answer. Because some men only understand force. Because he insulted you in ways that couldn't stand. Because... He met her eyes. Because nobody speaks about you that way while I'm drawing breath. Nobody. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her chest tight. I'm not your responsibility. Reese, I've been defending myself long before you came. I know that too. But see, that's the thing about partners. He moved closer, not touching, but near enough she could feel his warmth. They don't have to face things alone anymore, even when they're capable of it. Partners, she repeated, tasting the word like the whiskey sharp. Burning, but warming too. Is that what we are? That's what I'd like us to be, if you're willing. She set down her glass, turned to face him fully. In the afternoon light streaming through windows they'd repaired together, she could see every line of his face, every scar that told a story of survival. I don't know how to be partners with someone, she admitted. Theodore wasn't a partner. He was a keeper, and I was something to be kept before him. I was my father's assistant, never quite daughter enough. I've never been just equal, valued for what I am rather than despite it. Then we'll learn together. He reached out, touched her hand lightly. I warn you, I'm not good at it either. Too many years alone, too many walls built. But I figure if we're both bad at it, maybe we'll match. She laughed, despite everything, at the absurdity of two damaged souls attempting partnership, at the hope threading through their careful words, at the way his touch made her want things she'd sworn off. All right, she said, partners, we'll try. He squeezed her hand gently, then stepped back, giving her space. Marsh will be gone tomorrow, but men like him circle back. We should be ready. I know. She moved to the window, watching the road. Part of me wants to run, pack up, find another town, start over where no one knows me. Is that what you want to do? She thought about it, really thought about it. The freedom of the road, the blank slate of a new place. Then she looked around the cabin they'd reinforced together, at the business she'd built, at the man standing quietly behind her, waiting for her decision without pushing. No, she said finally. I'm tired of running. This is my place, our place. If trouble comes, we'll face it here. Together. Together. That evening, word came that Marsh had indeed left on the late stage, but not before sending several telegrams and making threats about legal action. The town was divided, some worried about potential consequences, others proud of their stand. Reese and Maeve prepared for whatever might come, checking weapons, reinforcing locks, planning defensive positions if needed. It was grim work, but they found unexpected moments of lightness in it. You know, Maeve said, watching him show her a better grip for the rifle. This isn't how I imagined partnership looking. What did you imagine? I don't know. Shared meals, divided chores, someone to talk to in the evenings. She smiled wryly. Not fortress building and marksmanship lessons. We have those other things too, he pointed out, just with added complications. True. She practiced the stance he'd shown her, noting his nod of approval. I suppose every partnership has its challenges. Some more than others, he agreed. But I'd rather face armed thugs with you than peace with anyone else. The declaration hung between them, heavier than he'd intended. Maeve lowered the rifle, turned to face him. Reese Devlin, are you trying to court me while teaching me to shoot? He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Maybe. Is it working? Maybe, she echoed, but her smile took any sting from the teasing. They returned to their practice, but the air between them had shifted again. What had started as wary alliance had become partnership, and partnership was warming into something neither quite dared name yet. But it was there in the careful way they moved around each other, in the lingering glances, in the way their hands brushed and neither pulled away. Later, as they shared supper, Maeve found herself studying him across the table, this quiet man who'd walked into her life half dead and somehow brought it fully alive, who saw her height as strength, her independence as admirable rather than threatening, who stood beside her, literally beside her, as an equal. What are you thinking? He asked, catching her stare. Dangerous thoughts, she admitted. Such as... She took a breath, decided on honesty. Such is how I'm glad you stayed. How this place feels more like home with you in it. How I'm starting to want things I swore I'd never want again. He set down his fork, giving her his full attention. What things? Partnership, trust, maybe even... She stopped, not quite ready for that word. Maybe even, he agreed softly, understanding. They finished their meal in companionable silence, both aware they stood on the edge of something irreversible. Outside, night fell over Dustwater, bringing its familiar sounds, coyotes calling, wind in the cottonwoods, the distant laughter from the saloon. Inside, two people who'd found each other against all odds continued the delicate dance of learning to believe in second chances. They were still careful, still scarred, still wary of promises too easily broken. But they were no longer alone, and in a hard world that asked too much and gave too little, that was its own kind of miracle. The town meeting was called for the following Thursday evening, packed into the small church that served multiple denominations depending on which preacher was passing through. Word had spread that Judge Holbrook had received official correspondence regarding the Marsh situation, and opinions were running hot about what should be done. Maeve and Reese arrived to find the church already crowded, conversations buzzing like angry bees. They took seats near the back, aware of the glances, some supportive, others worried, a few openly hostile. Mayor Thornton called for order, his banker's voice carrying over the noise. Folks, we're here to discuss the situation that's developed regarding Mr. Edwin Marsh and certain actions taken by members of our community. What's to discuss? Called out Thomas Garrett from the middle of the room. Maeve noticed he'd been drinking, face flushed with liquid courage. That woman, he pointed at Maeve, harbored a runaway wife, broke the law. Now we're all gonna pay for it. Nobody's proved she harbored anyone, Sam Morrison countered. Marsh searched the place himself and found nothing. Because they hid her, Garrett insisted. Everyone knows it, and now we got territorial marshals asking questions, making threats about investigating the whole town. Judge Holbrook stood, producing a letter from his coat. I have indeed received communication from the territorial capital. They're concerned about reports of a town conspiring to obstruct justice, interfering with lawful marriage rights. A murmur ran through the crowd. Maeve felt Reese tense beside her but kept her own expression calm. However, the judge continued, raising his voice over the reaction. I've also received 3 letters from Mrs. Sarah Winters, formerly Mrs. Sarah Marsh, stating clearly that she left of her own accord, traveled alone, and received no assistance from anyone in Dustwater beyond what any traveler might expect. Convenient, Garrett sneered. Letters can say anything. Indeed they can, agreed Widow Pearson, standing with surprising vigor. Like the letters some of us have written to our cousins at the Capitol, about a man who threatened honest merchants, hired thugs to assault people at market, and made himself a general nuisance before being run out of town. The crowd shifted, alliances becoming clearer. It wasn't just about Maeve anymore. It was about what kind of town Dustwater wanted to be. Sheriff Dawson stood next. I'll make this simple. As far as the law I enforce is concerned, no crime was committed. A woman left her husband, that's not illegal. Another woman ran a boarding house, also not illegal. If the territorial government wants to waste time investigating gossip and hearsay, that's their choice, but I won't be party to it. Easy for you to say, someone called out. You don't have a business that depends on territorial contracts. Neither do I, announced Hiram Watts, the old-timer who'd won his bet about Maeve lasting through winter. But I got eyes and a memory. I remember when Tom Garrett there was run off his family's ranch for rustling. Remember when Judge Holbrook here took bribes from the mining company. Remember a lot of things folks might prefer stayed forgotten. He paused, letting that sink in. Point is, we all got histories. Question is whether we let outsiders use them against us, or we stand together like a real town ought. The meeting devolved into arguments neighbor against neighbor, old grievances mixing with new fears. Through it all, Maeve sat quietly, aware she'd become a symbol of something larger than herself. The independent woman who wouldn't bow to convention. The outsider who'd made a place for herself. The tall oddity who refused to shrink. Finally, she stood. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turning to her. "I came to Dustwater seeking peace," she said, voice carrying clearly. "A place to exist without judgment or interference. Many of you have shown me kindness, and for that I'm grateful. Others have made it clear I don't belong, and that's your right." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Reese's hand brushed hers, a silent support. "But I won't apologize for helping someone who needed it. I won't apologize for running my business as I see fit. And I certainly won't apologize for refusing to cower before bullies, whether they're named Edwin Marsh or anyone else." Her gaze found Garrett, who looked away first. "If that makes me unwelcome here, so be it. I'll close the station and move on. But I won't pretend to be less than I am to make others comfortable." She sat back down to scattered applause and angry mutters. Mayor Thornton looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. "Well then," he said, "I suppose we should vote. All in favor of cooperating fully with any territorial investigation." A scattering of hands rose maybe a third of the room. Garrett's was highest. Naturally. All opposed. More hands, including Morrison, the widow Pearson, Sheriff Dawson, and others Maeve hadn't expected. Abstaining. The remainder, including the mayor himself, taking the coward's middle road. "The opposed have it," Thornton announced reluctantly. "Dustwater will not actively cooperate with fishing expeditions based on hearsay. Meeting adjourned." People filed out in clumps, the divide clear. Some nodded to Maeve and Reese as they passed. Others pointedly ignored them. Garrett shouldered past, muttering something about consequences. Outside, Constance Morrison caught up with him. "That was well said. Dear, don't let the naysayers trouble you. This town's got more good people than bad, they just need reminding sometimes." After she left, Maeve and Reese walked to their wagon in thoughtful silence. The night was clear. Stars sharp as glass in the cold air. "You could have let them think you were apologetic," Reese said eventually. "Might have made things easier." "Would you have respected me if I had?" "No," he admitted. "But I worry what Garrett and his like might do now." "Let them try," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I'm tired of bending. Reese, tired of making myself smaller to fit in spaces designed by small minds. If that brings trouble, then trouble's what we'll face." He helped her onto the wagon seat, unnecessary but gallant. "We'll face," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." They rode home under the vast western sky, aware that lines had been drawn, sides chosen. The easy anonymity Maeve had sought was gone, replaced by something more complex, but perhaps more honest. She was known now, for better or worse. The tall woman who wouldn't shrink, the spinster who'd found a partner, the oddity who'd proven that different didn't mean less. The rest station looked peaceful in the moonlight, but they did a careful check anyway, a new routine since Marsh's threats. All was quiet, but Reese noticed fresh horse tracks near the stable, moving in a slow circle as if someone had been watching, waiting. "Could be anyone," Maeve said when he pointed them out. "Could be," he agreed, but they both knew better. Inside, they went through their evening rituals, banking the fire, checking windows, preparing for night. But when time came for Reese to spread his bedroll by the hearth, Maeve hesitated. "This is foolish," she said suddenly. He paused, blanket in hand. "What is—" "You sleeping on the floor like a guard dog. It's been weeks since Marsh left. If trouble comes, it won't matter which room you're in." "What are you suggesting?" She took a breath, visibly steeling herself. "I'm suggesting you use the small room, like a proper boarder. It's practical." He studied her face, reading the mixture of logic and something else, a testing of boundaries. perhaps. An offer of trust. "All right," he said simply, gathering his things. The small room felt different now, officially his rather than temporarily borrowed. He'd slept there before, during his recovery, but this was a choice, a statement, a step towards something neither of them quite had words for yet. Through the thin wall, he could hear Maeve moving in her own room, preparing for bed. The domesticity of it struck him, how they'd built these careful rhythms together, how natural it felt to share space while maintaining respectful distance. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Reese?" "Come in." She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, looking uncertain. "I just wanted to say thank you for standing with me tonight, for everything since you arrived." "No thanks needed. Partners. Remember?" "Yes, but—" she hesitated, then stepped into the room. "I need to tell you something. About Theodore. About why I really left." He sat on the narrow bed, giving her his full attention. She perched on the single chair, hands twisting in her lap. "I told you he left me for another woman. That's true, but not complete." She took a shaky breath. "I was with child when he told me, 3 months along. He said he couldn't bear the thought of giant children, of sons who'd tower over him, daughters no man would want. Said it was better this way, a clean break before—" She stopped, unable to continue. Reese felt rage rise in his throat, pure, hot fury at a man who could wound so deeply with words alone. "The baby came early," she whispered. "Too early. A little girl, perfect and tiny and still. I buried her alone. No marker, no ceremony. Theodore had already moved on with his new wife. Then I came here, where no one knew, where I could pretend it was just my height that made me unsuitable, not my failure to—" "Stop!" His voice came out rougher than intended. "You didn't fail anything. A man who'd reject his own child for feared imperfection, that's the failure. The loss. I'm sorry for your loss, but it wasn't your fault." She looked at him then, tears streaming. "How can you know that?" "Because I know you. Because for months I've watched you tend travelers, doctor injuries, show kindness to strangers. You would have been a wonderful mother. Any child would have been lucky to have you." She broke then, shoulders shaking with long-suppressed grief. Reese moved without thinking, crossing to kneel beside her chair, gathering her into his arms. She resisted for a moment habit, maybe, or fear, then collapsed against him, letting years of pain finally escape. He held her while she cried, this strong woman who'd carried such loss alone, murmured meaningless comfort into her hair, promised without words that she wouldn't have to carry it alone anymore. When the storm passed, she pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Don't apologize. Not for grief, never for being human." She touched his face then, tentative as a bird. "What did I do to deserve you, Reese Devlin?" "Nothing to do with deserving. Sometimes broken people just find each other, recognize the cracks because they match our own." She leaned forward, rested her forehead against his. They stayed like that, breathing the same air, sharing the same space. Not quite an embrace, not quite a kiss, but something profound nonetheless. "Stay," she whispered. I'm not ready for, but stay, just be here, so I'm not alone with the memories tonight." He understood. Some nights the ghosts were too loud, the darkness too complete. Some nights you just needed another heartbeat in the room to remind you the world held more than loss. "All right," he said. They arranged themselves carefully, she on the bed, fully clothed, he on the floor beside it with extra blankets. Propriety maintained, but proximity achieved. In the darkness, her hand found his, fingers intertwining. "Partners," she said softly. "Partners," he agreed. They talked quietly as the night deepened about inconsequential things, important things, anything to keep the shadows at bay, about her daughter who'd never drawn breath, About his friends who'd died believing in causes that seemed meaningless now. About dreams deferred and paths not taken, and the strange miracle of finding each other at the intersection of their damage. Finally, her breathing evened into sleep, but she didn't release his hand. Reese lay awake, standing guard against her nightmares and his own, thinking about trust and tenderness and the terrifying possibility of hope. Outside, danger might be circling, consequences gathering like storm clouds, but inside, two people who'd given up on love were learning that sometimes the universe offered second chances to those brave enough to take them, even if taking them meant risking everything all over again. The night was deeper than usual, moon hidden behind clouds that promised rain by morning. Maeve lay sleepless despite the late hour, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin wind testing the walls they'd reinforced, the settling of old wood, the steady breathing of the man who'd chosen to stay. It had been a week since the town meeting, since she'd shared her deepest grief with Reese, since they'd begun navigating this new closeness that was more than partnership, but not quite what others might name it. Each night, he'd return to his own room, but something fundamental had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained was dissolving like morning frost. A sound outside made her sit up horses, moving slow and quiet. Not the approach of honest travelers who'd call out their presence. She slipped from bed, reached for the rifle, and padded barefoot to the window. "Reese," she whispered, but he was already there, emerging from his room with the silent purpose of a man who'd learned to wake ready for trouble. "How many?" he asked, checking his pistol. 3, maybe 4. She peered through the gap in the shutters. "Coming from the East Road." They'd planned for this, walked through scenarios, but reality made her heart race in ways preparation couldn't prevent. These weren't Edwin Marsh's hired thugs making noise in daylight. These were men who came calling in the deep night, when law and witnesses slept. "The barn," Reese said quietly. "They're heading for the barn first." Where the horses were. Cut off their transportation, trap them in the cabin. Smart, if cruel. "I'll go out the back," he said. "Circle around. You bar the door behind me and—" "No." The word came out firm, surprising them both. "We face this together or not at all." He looked at her in the dim light, this tall woman in her nightdress with a rifle in her hands and steel in her spine. "Maeve." "Partners," she reminded him. "That means something, or it doesn't." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Stubborn woman." "Broken down drifter," she countered. "Are we doing this?" They slipped out the back door together, moving with shared purpose through shadows they knew by heart. The intruders were at the barn, working at the lock Reese had reinforced just days ago. In the faint starlight, Maeve recognized one silhouette, Thomas Garrett. Of course, the others were strangers, hired guns by their look. "Evening, gentlemen," Reese said conversationally, stepping into view with his pistol casual but ready. "Bit late for a social call." The men spun, hands reaching for weapons, but froze when they saw Maeve beside him, rifle raised and steady. "Drop them," she said calmly. "I'm a good shot. Mr. Garrett can attest to that. Saw me practicing just last week. Didn't you—" Garrett's face twisted with rage and something else, humiliation. Maybe, at being held at gunpoint by the woman he'd called unnatural. "You can't shoot all of us." "No," Reese agreed. "But we can shoot 2 for certain. Question is, which 2 want to die for whatever Garrett's paying you?" The hired men exchanged glances, calculating odds. 1, smarter than he looked, slowly unbuckled his gun belt. "This ain't worth dying for, Tom." "Coward," Garrett snarled. But the damage was done. The others followed suit, weapons thudding into the dirt. "Now then," Maeve said, still steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "Let's discuss why you're skulking around our property in the middle of the night." "Our property," Garrett laughed, ugly and bitter. "Listen to her. Boys, The mannish spinster and her kept man, pretending at respectability. Everyone knows what you really are. A woman who can't act like a woman. Keeping a man like a pet because no real man would. The rifle shot split the night, sending Garrett's hat spinning into the darkness. The sound echoed off the distant mountains, a declaration that rang through the still air. "The next one won't miss," Maeve said quietly. "And before you threaten me with law or consequences, remember that you're trespassing, armed, in the night. Sheriff Dawson will be very interested to hear about this." "If you live to tell him," one of the hired men muttered, then grunted as his companion elbowed him. "Nobody's dying tonight," Reese said firmly. "You're going to collect your weapons, mount up, and ride out. Come near this place again, and we won't be so generous." "This isn't over," Garrett spat, but he was already backing away. "You think you've won something. You're nothing but outcasts playing house. The whole town laughs at you, the giant woman and the broken soldier, pretending you matter." Maeve lowered the rifle slightly. "We matter to each other. That's enough." The simple truth of it seemed to deflate Garrett more than threats could have. He and his men gathered their guns under watchful eyes, mounted their horses, and rode off into the darkness. But at the property line, Garrett turned back. "You'll regret this," he shouted. "Both of you, I'll see you run out of this town if it's the last thing I do." They waited until the hoofbeats faded completely before lowering their weapons. Then Maeve started trembling, the delayed reaction hitting all at once. Reese took the rifle gently, set it aside, and pulled her against him. "You did well," he murmured into her hair, steady as stone. "I was terrified," she admitted against his shoulder. "So was I, but we faced it together. That's what matters." She pulled back to look at him, this man who'd stood beside her without question, who saw her strength as something to admire rather than fear. "Together," she repeated. Something shifted in his expression. A decision made. "Maeve, I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. "If you're about to say you're leaving." "No." He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing her cheek. "Never that. I'm trying to say, badly, that I love you, that I've loved you for weeks, maybe months, that standing beside you tonight, facing down trouble together, that's all I want for whatever years the good Lord grants me." The words hung between them, precious and terrifying. Maeve felt tears start, but for once they weren't from grief. "I'm difficult," she warned. "Set in my ways, too tall, too strong, too much of everything." "You're perfect," he countered. "Exactly as you are, every stubborn, glorious inch of you." "I can't give you children. My body proved that already." "Don't want children. Want you. Just you." "People will talk, call us unnatural, mismatched." "Let them talk." His hands framed her face now, holding her gaze. "I've faced Confederate cavalry charges. Maeve, you think I care what Thomas Garrett and his ilk say about us?" She laughed then, shaky but real. "When you put it that way?" "Marry me," he said suddenly. "Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. When you're ready, when you trust that I'm not going anywhere, marry me and let them all choke on their gossip." "Reese?" "I know it's too soon. I know you need time. I'm just stating intentions, so you know where I stand." She studied his face, this good man who'd wandered into her life and chosen to stay, who saw her not as too much or not enough, but as exactly right, who offered partnership without possession, love without diminishment. "All right," she said softly. "All right. State your intentions. Court me properly. Prove that you're not going anywhere." She managed a watery smile. "And teach me to make better coffee. That's non-negotiable." He laughed, pulled her close, and kissed her forehead. "Deal." They stood there in the barnyard where they'd just faced down armed men, holding each other as the first drops of rain began to fall. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be more Thomas Garretts, more Edwin Marshes, more people who couldn't understand a love that didn't fit their narrow definitions. But it was their ending, or rather, their beginning. Two people who'd been broken by the world finding wholeness in each other. A tall woman and a wounded soldier, building something worth defending in a forgotten corner of the frontier. Later, as dawn approached and the rain drummed on the roof they'd repaired together, Maeve lay in her bed thinking about trust and tenderness, and the terrifying, beautiful possibility of being loved for exactly who she was. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Reese stood in the doorway, hesitant despite everything they'd shared. "I just wanted to say good night, or good morning, I suppose." She studied him, this man who'd fought beside her, who'd declared his love in a barnyard, who still respected boundaries even as they dissolved. Then she made a decision that would have shocked the woman she'd been when he arrived. "Stay," she said simply. "Maeve? Not yet, but stay. Sleep beside me. Let me wake up knowing you're there, that you're real, that this isn't just another dream that'll shatter come daylight." He crossed the room slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When she didn't, he lay down beside her, on top of the quilts, fully clothed, proper enough for propriety, close enough for comfort. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised in the darkness. "I'm starting to believe that," she whispered back. They lay there as rain washed the night's violence away, hands linked between them, building a bridge of trust, one quiet moment at a time. Outside, the world remained hard and unforgiving, full of people who'd never understand a love that looked different from their expectations. But inside, two people who'd given up on happiness were discovering that sometimes the universe saved its best gifts for those who'd learned to appreciate them. That love could grow in the rockiest soil if tended with patience and courage. That being different wasn't a curse, but a gift if you found someone who saw it that way too. The cabin stood solid around them, reinforced and weatherproofed by their shared labor, a shelter against storms, literal and figurative, a place where a woman could be tall and a man could be wounded and both could be whole. Home, Maeve thought as sleep finally claimed her. After all these years, all these miles, she'd found home. Not in a place, but in a person, in a partnership, in the promise of all the mornings they'd faced together. Come what may. And in the small room off the kitchen, the sign she'd posted months ago remained, weather-worn but readable. No husband wanted, no company sought, tea available. Tomorrow, perhaps, she'd take it down. Or perhaps she'd leave it up as a reminder of who she'd been before a wounded soldier taught her that sometimes the very thing we swear we don't want is exactly what we need. Either way, she thought with a smile as Reese's breathing deepened into sleep beside her, the tea would definitely improve. He'd insist on that, her partner, her equal, her unexpected love. Her cowboy who'd walked into her cabin and gently, persistently, lovingly refused to leave. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love blooming in the untamed frontier. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what touched your heart in Maeve and Reese's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of two broken souls finding wholeness in each other, please subscribe to Wild West Stories. 1850, hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button so more listeners can discover this story of courage, trust, and love against all odds. Until next time, partners.